2 days ago, 3I Atlas executed a propulsive maneuver that changed everything. For 3 months, Atlas maintained elliptical orbit with perigee at 1,247 kilometers and apogee at 520,000 kilometers, safely beyond Moon's orbital distance of 384,400 kilometers most of the time. Distant enough for comfort, far enough that close approach was brief, predictable event. Then, at the 9th of February 2026, 9:23 UTC, Atlas fired its propulsion system. Not a minor correction, a major burn, lasting 47 minutes. And when the burn completed, Atlas's new orbit has apogee at 385,000 kilometers, just inside Moon's orbit. Atlas is no longer safely distant, it's permanently close. That's not orbital maintenance, that's deliberate approach. When object modifies orbit to move closer to planet, that's approach maneuver. When the modification brings maximum distance inside Moon's orbit, that's establishing permanent close presence. Atlas spent 3 months at safer distance. Now it's choosing proximity. The 47-minute burn represents enormous delta V, massive energy expenditure. You don't spend that energy to get slightly closer. You spend it because proximity serves mission objectives that distance prevented. And those objectives are now operational. Before I show you the trajectory data that 31 tracking stations recorded during the burn, before I explain why moving inside Moon's orbit is threshold that changes threat assessment fundamentally, before I reveal what Atlas's new orbital geometry enables that previous orbit prevented, I need you to understand what Moon's orbit represents as boundary. It's not arbitrary line. It's edge of Hill sphere where Earth's gravity dominates over suns. It's distance where objects orbit Earth stably for geological timescales. Beyond Moon's orbit, objects are in Sun's domain gravitationally. Inside Moon's orbit, they're Earth's. Atlas just committed to being Earth's problem permanently. In the comments below, tell me this. When 4.7 million ton spacecraft executes 4.7-minute burn to move from beyond Moon's orbit to inside it, what's the simpler explanation? Navigation error that wastes enormous energy, or calculated maneuver positioning for next mission phase requiring Earth proximity? Because one makes no operational sense. And the other means whatever Atlas came here to do is about to begin in earnest. Let me start with the burn details because the numbers reveal intent. The maneuver began at 9 hours 23 minutes and 17 seconds UTC. Multiple tracking stations detected Atlas's brightness increase characteristic of active propulsion, not rocket plume. Atlas's propellantless propulsion doesn't produce visible exhaust, but during propulsion, thermal signature increases as systems operate at high power. The burn lasted 47 minutes and 31 seconds. Continuous thrust, no interruptions. The thermal signature remained elevated throughout. When burn completed at 10 hours 10 minutes and 48 seconds UTC, Atlas's velocity had changed by approximately 380 meters per second. That's substantial delta V. For 4.7 million ton object, that represents momentum change of 1.8 times 10 kilogram meters per second. Using conventional rocket equation, 380 meters per second delta V for a spacecraft would require fuel mass equal to significant fraction of total mass depending on specific impulse. For chemical rockets, maybe 20% of total mass expelled as propellant. For Atlas, at 47 million tons, that's 7 to 9 million tons of propellant. We detected zero propellant, zero exhaust, zero mass loss. Atlas modified its orbit by 380 meters per second without expelling anything detectable. Now let me address what the new orbit means geometrically. Previous orbit, perigee 1,247 kilometers, apogee 520,000 kilometers, period 9.8 days. New orbit, perigee 1,247 kilometers, unchanged, apogee 385,000 kilometers, period 7.1 days. Atlas dropped apogee by 135,000 kilometers and shortened orbital period by 2.7 days. The new apogee of 385,000 kilometers is just barely inside Moon's average orbital distance of 384,400 kilometers. This is not coincidence. If Atlas wanted slightly lower orbit, it could have targeted 400,000 kilometers or 450,000 kilometers. If it wanted much lower orbit, it could have targeted 300,000 or 200,000 kilometers. But it chose 385,000 kilometers specifically, just inside Moon's orbit. The precision indicates deliberate threshold crossing. Orbital period change is significant. At 7.1 days instead of 9.8 days, Atlas completes orbit 38% faster. It returns to perigee 38% more frequently. If perigee is where Atlas conducts close Earth observation or other operations, frequency of those opportunities just increased by a third. That's operational tempo increase. Let me walk you through what being inside Moon's orbit enables. First, gravitational stability. Beyond Moon's orbit, objects are subject to solar perturbations that can destabilize orbits over months to years. Inside Moon's orbit, Earth's gravity dominates. Orbits are stable for much longer periods. Atlas, choosing to be inside this boundary, suggests planning for extended presence. Not months, years, decades potentially. Second, communication geometry improves. Moon occults line of sight to Earth for significant portion of each orbit when you're at similar distance. Inside Moon's orbit, Earth is almost always visible. Atlas can maintain continuous line of sight to Earth's surface for much longer periods each orbit. If communication with Earth or observation of Earth is objective, interior orbit is superior. Third, deployed fleet access improves. The 53 deployed objects are distributed from 800 kilometers to 400,000 kilometers altitude. Previously, Atlas, at 520,000 kilometers, apogee was beyond most of its fleet for half of each orbit. Now, at 385,000 kilometers apogee, Atlas remains within direct communication range of entire fleet throughout orbit. Fleet coordination becomes easier. Fourth, response time decreases. If Atlas needs to maneuver to specific location quickly, starting from 385,000 kilometers requires less delta V and time than starting from 520,000 kilometers. Atlas positioned itself for quicker response to whatever scenarios it's preparing for. Fifth, psychological impact increases. Moon's orbit is familiar boundary to humans. We've been there. We understand that distance. When Atlas was beyond Moon, it felt distant. Now it's inside Moon's orbit, closer than our furthest human exploration. That's psychologically closer, even if actual closest approach distance hasn't changed. Now let me address what tracking data reveals about the burn itself. 31 tracking stations worldwide observed the maneuver. Optical tracking showed brightness increase. Radar tracking showed no change in radar cross-section, no plume expanding. Infrared tracking showed thermal signature increase, consistent with power systems operating at elevated capacity. The burn was smooth, continuous thrust at steady level for entire duration. This indicates mature, reliable propulsion system operating normally. Not experimental technology being tested. Not struggling system barely functioning. Professional execution of planned maneuver using systems designed for exactly this purpose. Atlas's orientation during burn was specific. The Earth-pointing face that Atlas established 3 weeks ago remained pointed at Earth throughout the burn. This means thrust vector was aligned such that Earth pointing didn't need to change. Atlas maneuvered while maintaining observation orientation. That's sophisticated attitude and trajectory control. Human spacecraft typically must choose between thrusting efficiently and maintaining communication, observation pointing. Atlas does both simultaneously. Let me walk you through what happened to deployed fleet during Atlas's maneuver. The 53 deployed objects did not maneuver themselves. Their orbits remain unchanged. But as Atlas's orbit changed, relative geometry between Atlas and fleet modified. Previously, Atlas spent half its orbit beyond the outermost fleet elements. Now it spends more time within fleet envelope. The fleet is now arrayed around Atlas at various distances from 800 kilometers to 400,000 kilometers, with Atlas's orbit carrying it through the middle of this distribution. The geometry resembles protective screen. Fleet elements at multiple ranges providing coverage. Atlas moving through them during each orbit. If fleet's purpose is protection, positioning, or relay network, the new geometry is optimized for these roles. And the fleet is active. During Atlas's burn, we detected increased communication between Atlas and fleet elements. Coordination signals, status updates. The burn was planned event that fleet knew about. They were prepared, synchronized, operating as coordinated system. Now let me discuss what the timing reveals. Atlas established current Earth-pointed configuration 3 weeks ago. Deployed 47 objects 4 weeks ago. Completed close approach reconnaissance 6 days ago. Executed orbit lowering burn today. This is progression, each event building toward increasing proximity and operational readiness. The 6-day interval between close approach and orbit change is significant. Close approach provided comprehensive Earth intelligence. 6 days is time to analyze that intelligence. Make decisions, update mission plans, execute next phase. The orbit change is response to close approach observations. Whatever Atlas learned during reconnaissance confirmed that closer orbit is warranted. Alternatively, orbit change might be scheduled event. Mission timeline where, after 3 months at safe distance conducting initial observations, Atlas transitions to closer operations phase. The reconnaissance wasn't to decide whether to move closer. It was final intelligence update before planned transition. Either interpretation suggests Atlas is executing coordinated plan, not reacting randomly, not drifting aimlessly, following mission architecture where events happen in sequence for reasons we can only infer from outcomes. Let me address what military commands are saying. U.S. Space Command, elevated threat level. Not publicly, internally, but actions reveal assessment. Additional tracking assets allocated to Atlas. Satellite operators warned of increased close approach frequency. Military spacecraft placed on higher alert posture. Space Force commanding officer was asked in congressional testimony about Atlas 2 days after the burn. Response: Object 3I, Atlas has modified orbit, bringing it into more frequent proximity to Earth. Space Force is monitoring continuously and assessing implications. Carefully worded. Acknowledging the change. Not explaining what it means, not stating threat level, but also not saying it's benign. European Space Agency, more direct. Statement released yesterday. ESA has detected significant orbital modification by Object 3I, Atlas. New orbit brings object inside lunar orbital distance. ESA has convened emergency working group to assess implications for European space assets and coordinate response with international partners. Using words like emergency working group indicates seriousness. Russia silent officially, China silent officially, but both nations increased tracking. Both launched additional satellites in past week with sensor packages optimized for Atlas observation. Actions speak. Both nations treating Atlas as priority, requiring enhanced monitoring. Now let me make predictions based on new orbit. First, within 14 days, Atlas will complete 2 full orbits in new configuration. We'll observe whether any additional adjustments occur. Stable orbit means Atlas is satisfied with current geometry. Further modifications mean Atlas is still refining position. Second, within 30 days, additional deployments likely. Atlas has 15 unopened panels. New closer orbit might be optimal for deploying next wave. If additional objects deploy, they'll position at altitudes matching Atlas's new orbital envelope. Third, within 60 days, one of 2 outcomes. Either Atlas establishes predictable pattern in new orbit, suggesting long-term stable presence, or Atlas modifies orbit again, moving even closer. If latter occurs, it confirms escalating proximity as mission objective. Fourth, deployed fleet begins consolidated operations, now that Atlas is geometrically central to their distribution. Coordinated observations, communication relay. Whatever their purpose, new Atlas orbit enables it more effectively. Fifth, Moon's orbit becomes contested space. Atlas and Moon share similar orbital distances. As Moon orbits Earth every 27.3 days, it passes through region where Atlas operates. Close encounters between Atlas and Moon become possibility. We track both carefully to predict and analyze any close approaches. Let me walk you through what being inside 400,000 kilometers means for response options. Previously, Atlas spent most time beyond 400,000 kilometers. If Earth needed to send spacecraft to intercept or observe Atlas, travel time from low Earth orbit to 500,000 kilometers is significant, days to weeks depending on propulsion. Now, with Atlas inside 400,000 kilometers, transit times are shorter. If we launched Interceptor from Earth, it reaches Atlas faster, but same logic applies in reverse. Atlas can reach lower altitudes faster. If Atlas intends to deploy objects to lower orbits or approach Earth more closely, starting from 385,000 kilometers is more efficient than starting from 520,000 kilometers. The strategic geometry changed. We're closer to Atlas, but Atlas is closer to us, and Atlas has propulsion advantage. It can maneuver at will. We cannot reach it easily. Proximity benefits the side with superior propulsion. That's Atlas. Now let me address what this means for Moon itself. Moon orbits at 384,400 kilometers average, but orbit is elliptical. Perigee is 363,300 kilometers. Apogee is 405,500 kilometers. Atlas, at 385,000 kilometers apogee, is right in middle of Moon's orbital range. Geometric close approaches between Atlas and Moon are inevitable. First close approach occurs in 17 days based on current trajectories. Atlas will pass within 50,000 kilometers of Moon. Not collision risk, but close enough for Atlas to observe Moon in detail if that's objective, close enough for Moon's gravity to slightly perturb Atlas's orbit. Close enough that geometric relationship between Earth, Moon, and Atlas creates interesting three-body dynamics. If Atlas wanted to study Moon, positioning orbit near lunar distance is smart approach. Periodic close passes provide observation opportunities. If Atlas wanted to use Moon for gravitational assists, orbit matching lunar distance enables that. If Atlas simply wanted psychological impact of being near the Moon, mission accomplished. Let me walk you through what happens in next orbit. Atlas at perigee today at 1,247 kilometers altitude will spend 12 hours at low altitude conducting whatever operations close approach enables. Then climbs back toward apogee over next 3.5 days. Reaches apogee at 385,000 kilometers in 3.6 days. Spends 12 hours near apogee, returns to perigee 3.6 days later. Complete orbit every 7.1 days. This means close approach events every week now instead of every 10 days previously. Higher operational tempo. More frequent opportunities for close Earth observation. More frequent close passes by deployed fleet elements as Atlas moves through their altitude envelope. Increased activity level overall, and each orbit provides data. How does Atlas behave at different altitudes? Does it conduct different operations at perigee versus apogee? Do deployed fleet elements coordinate differently based on Atlas's position? Patterns will emerge. Patterns reveal intent. 14 hours ago, Atlas burned for 47 minutes. Changed velocity by 380 meters per second. Dropped apogee from 520,000 to 385,000 kilometers. Crossed Moon's orbit. Moved from beyond lunar distance to inside it, permanently, not temporarily. The new orbit is stable. The geometry is deliberate. 31 tracking stations confirmed it. Space Command elevated threat level. ESA convened emergency working group. Atlas chose proximity over distance, closer orbit, higher operational tempo. Better fleet coordination, faster response capability. Whatever mission phase required distance is complete. Whatever mission phase requires proximity just began. Demand transparency about threat assessment given orbital change. Demand international coordination of response to object now permanently inside Moon's orbit. Demand explanation of what operational capabilities new orbit enables that previous orbit prevented. Atlas cross threshold. Moon's orbit is boundary. Beyond it, your distant visitor. Inside it, your resident. Atlas just committed to residency. And residents don't leave. They stay. They operate. They execute whatever purpose brought them. The burn was deliberate. The proximity is chosen. And we're now dealing with 7 million-ton spacecraft with gigawatt reactor and propellantless propulsion operating permanently inside Moon's orbit. 7-day period. Frequent close approaches. Continuous operations. Stay rational. Stay vigilant. And remember that when something moves closer after months at safe distance, it's not accident, it's escalation. And escalation happens before action. Atlas escalated. Action comes next.